Well, good afternoon and welcome to another PBALC informational live stream. As always, we want to thank our sponsors, Frost Bank, for sponsoring all of our 2024 informational live streams. Today, we are joined by Kelli Sandman-Hurley. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Kelli's fine. Yeah.
From the Dyslexia Training Institute for an informational live stream about dyslexia. Welcome, Kelli. We are so happy to have you this month.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So let's start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and about the Institute.
Okay. I'm Kelli. I am the founder of the Dyslexia Training Institute. We were founded in 2008, and so I had a business partner when we started, and so she just retired. So the reason I bring that up is because we both worked at the Adult Literacy program, Read San Diego, which is the Adult Literacy program in the San Diego Public Library, and that's how we met. So I worked there for 12 years, and while we were working there, we decided that we really wanted to help people before they became the adults in the program. So that's how Dyslexia Training Institute started. We started because we wanted to provide training for anyone who was interested in helping anyone with dyslexia. And so we thought it would just be this local thing that we could do as parents of young children at the time, and it just exploded. So we offer lots of professional development for people who are interested in helping adults and children with dyslexia, and we do advocacy and write books and simulations and all that kind of stuff. And 95% of it is online.
Fabulous. And so let's get into the discussion about dyslexia.
Okay.
How common is dyslexia?
So that depends on who you ask. Generally, there's a 1 in 5 kind of communication that goes on about dyslexia. So a lot of people like to say it's 20% of the population. I kind of go down to about 10 to 15%. So it's still a big chunk of the population. The 20% comes from those who probably have dyslexia but were probably never identified. So because dyslexia occurs on a continuum of mild, moderate, severe to profound, you will have your people on the mild side that might never be identified. They're just slower readers, slower paced readers. Maybe poor spellers, but they don't, like I said, get identified. And then you have your people all the way over on the profound side who are having extreme trouble just reading single syllable words.
Okay. And so I know dyslexia is very misunderstood and often misdiagnosed. How is dyslexia commonly diagnosed?
So to get an official diagnosis of dyslexia, you do have to go to a psychologist or a neuropsychologist. And so that person will do a full cognitive test, and they will test all the different areas of literacy, reading comprehension, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, spelling. They might, hopefully they'll do some executive function assessment as well. If you are in the K-12 system, or they can test for disabilities, but they only test to identify people to qualify for special education. They don't actually diagnose. So the only way to get an official diagnosis is to get that private evaluation from a psychologist or neuropsychologist. And like I said, just make sure they do that full battery of assessments in order to get an appropriate diagnosis.
So even if you're in the K through 12 system, in order to get a full qualifiable diagnosis, you still have to go to a psychotherapist?
Well, you can still qualify for services using the school's assessment. You just don't get an official diagnosis from the school. So oftentimes you will get a good assessment. They just can't take that extra step. However, I am speaking to Texas. In Texas, you guys can. So your school districts can diagnose dyslexia. You're the only state in the country that does that. So I had to remind myself.
I was wondering because I've heard from many dyslexia specialists that like, I didn't realize that you had to get a diagnosis from a psychotherapist.
You don't in Texas, sorry.
But it's still other than Texas, you have to get a diagnosis from a psychotherapist. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I know dyslexia impacts every individual differently because I know they could have dyslexia and they could have other learning disabilities or learning differences. What are some of the different ways that dyslexia can present itself in a person?
So that goes back to the spectrum. So you can, if you are profoundly dyslexic, you will be that person that presents as having extreme difficulty decoding really simple words and spelling. You could be moderate, where you can read maybe up to like the third or fourth grade level, but then after that it becomes really difficult. And then you can be that mild, where you're just having trouble with fluency and maybe spelling. But you in order to know that, you have to have an assessment. So you have to figure it out. But so it can present it differently. Not everybody with dyslexia, actually, I'm going to back up. Everybody with dyslexia presents differently. So everybody has a different profile. Some people will struggle with phonemic awareness and some people won't. But you can still have dyslexia even if you don't struggle with phonemic awareness. So some people can have really good phonemic and phonological awareness, but they can't apply that strength to the writing. And then some people don't have either. And then some people have trouble with phonemic awareness, orthographic awareness, and rapid naming, and that's called double deficit. So they're having trouble with the processing of language as well as just understanding the language. So it
Okay.
presents differently in a lot of people. And then when we're talking about adults, you throw in all those life experiences and other things that might also, be affecting what it looks like.
And so let's speak about the adult side of dyslexia,
Yeah.
because we end up um, with a lot of adults that have either limited literacy or struggle with reading and writing, and many a times we have found that they were not misdiagnosed or not diagnosed with some kind of learning disability. Most of the time it's dyslexia. And so, what are some recommendations on how adults can overcome? They've already been through the system, and unfortunately, they didn't get the right resources. They were not provided with the right resources or testing or education, and so now they're adults struggling with dyslexia. And so, how can adults overcome the challenges associated with dyslexia and master even language skills or reading and writing, um, as well as their peers?
Okay, so um, if you're an adult with dyslexia and you've been struggling all of your life, it's not likely that you're going. I don't want to say that. It's very difficult to get to the same level as your peers who never struggled with dyslexia, because as an adult, your brain is just plastic, and so it's more difficult. Um, so what they need is they need a teacher who is highly qualified and understands how English is structured to show them how the language works. So adults that I spoke to when I wrote the book Adult Side of Dyslexia all kind of tell me that they don't really trust teachers anymore because they've had so many people who think they can help them and then they never do. So, when you have an adult in front of you, the first thing you need to do is talk to them about their journey. Ask them about how dyslexia has impacted them, ask them what they struggle with, ask them what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and gain their trust so that they think that you actually understand. And then once you understand, you need to be that expert teacher. You need to be that person that can say, you know what, let's talk about, why two is spelled TWO. I know why it's spelled that way. I'm going to help you understand why it's spelled that way. But gain their trust that you actually know what you're doing, or else, because, like in adult literacy, the coming and going is the problem is really high. So if you have, it's because they know right away whether or not you can help them. And so at Reed San Diego, we worked with volunteer tutors, and they're amazing people. And I trained the volunteers, but they're volunteer tutors. And I used to always say, you need to have the least trained teaching the hardest to teach. So I mean, I feel like we should have the highest trained people teaching these adults who've been struggling all their lives. And if we did that, then the adults would trust the system and probably make a lot more progress.
Unfortunately, there's not much funding available to hire very qualified instructors, and therefore we and the adult literacy organizations and in the U.S. have to rely very heavily on
No, I know, and
volunteer
like I said, I
instructors.
love the volunteers. I thought they were amazing, but I just, you're dealing with people who have this issue that's serious, and it
Mm-hmm.
requires expertise.
Yeah. Okay. And so, um, this is a good transition. It's to talk a little bit about about your book, The Adult Side of Dyslexia. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a copy of it, Kelly, but
I'll send you.
we will be purchasing one for to keep for our records, because and the like I said, the adult side of dyslexia is not very, it's not spoken about very often. And so what led you to write this book, and why did you write it, and how did you come about uh formulating it and creating it?
Okay. So I wrote two other books called Dyslexia Advocate, Dyslexia and Spelling, and I really,
Mhm.
those were fine and they were great, but my passion was always been the adults. So I really wanted to go back to why I do this to begin with. So
Mhm.
I always talk about this one student, Linford, who was my very first assessment. I was in my 20s and he was my first assessment, and I was asking him all these questions. I was asking his name, his address, what is your goal? What are your goals? Why are you with the literacy program? What do you want to learn? And just, kind of writing everything down. I looked up and he was just bawling and he was
Oh.
crying. And here I am, that this adult man is just telling me his whole life story about how literacy had impacted him. And so he's the reason I do what I do. So I wanted to go back to that. So I went back. I just wanted to give them the spotlight that they deserve. But I also think that we can learn so much from them in the K-12 system. So I interviewed 50 adults. I asked them all the exact same questions, and then I transcribed all of the interviews, and then I went through all the interviews and looked for common themes. So what were some commonalities? What were some things that they all shared? And then I each chapter is based on one of those themes. And I promised the adults that I would write something that would help kids who are currently struggling in a class right now. So I hope
Mhm.
that's what I did. But I really did try to take what they told me and then translate that into, okay, now you're a K-12 teacher or you're a parent or an advocate. What can you do to make sure they don't become the adult crying in my office?
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was did you see a theme among all of the adults that you interviewed for your book?
There were a lot of them. So the first one is, when you ask professionals or people like me or advocates or attorneys to describe dyslexia, we'll give you a definition. We'll say, oh, dyslexia is a phonological
Mhm.
processing problem, blah, blah, blah. But if you ask an adult, I asked all of them, how would you describe your dyslexia? They told me a story and they gave me their journey. It wasn't like a clinical definition. It was difficult, it was hard. This is how it impacted my life. So I did come up with the theme, or I noticed a theme, that the way we speak, people like me and people with dyslexia, is different. And so we need
Mhm.
to have that conversation with them about what it feels like for them versus our clinical diagnosis. There's a place for a clinical diagnosis. I mean, we need that, but I think we need
Mhm.
to consolidate a little bit so that it includes the social emotional impact.
The
Um,
human side of dyslexia.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other part was, I asked them all, give me one word to describe reading out loud. And they all said traumatic, terrifying, horrifying. And so, that was really, big, because they use the word traumatic a lot in my interviews. And so I think
Mhm.
it's important that, educators understand, when you're asking someone to struggle through something in front of all their peers, that that's a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And it's unnecessary because there's no pedagogical research that supports that as an instructional tool.
Yeah.
So we need to stop doing that because it's torturing people. So,
Mhm.
there's that. And then a few other things, like they don't really trust the education system when they have their own children and then they go to school with those kids, like they'll go to a school meeting or a school function or IP for their children, that they might seem like the difficult parent. But if you dig a little deeper, they might be that difficult parent because they were that child that experienced that trauma, and
Mhm.
they don't trust you.
They
So we
don't
have
want their kids to go through it. Yeah.
you didn't help
Yeah.
them, so they don't trust you to help their child.
Yeah. So there's a lot of mistrust in the education system, it sounds like too, as
Yeah,
well.
there's a lot of different opportunities. Like if you in the dyslexia community does this thing where they're like, oh, if you have dyslexia, everything's going to be great. You're going to be great. I'm like, no, that's not true because I worked in adult literacy, and it has a
Mhm.
really negative impact on people. So stop
Yep.
giving this false narrative that you're going to be wonderful because you have dyslexia. Things are difficult. It's hard.
Yeah. It's gonna be difficult. It's a you can, be successful, but it's not gonna be a smooth road.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yes, you
Yeah.
can definitely be successful. It's
Mhm.
just it's not, it's not you're not successful because you have dyslexia.
Yes, exactly. And so, speaking of the education system and changes that need to be made, do you feel that the American education system is failing students with dyslexia or any other learning differences? And if so, what can we do to change that?
Wow. Um, yes, I'm going to say, yeah, I'm just gonna throw it out there. At this age,
Uh-huh.
I'm just gonna start saying what I think. I Yeah, they're definitely I can only speak for kids with dyslexia and learning disabilities because that's where I work. Yes, they're definitely failing them. They're moving too slowly. They are not they're doing a little bit of too much of this and too much of that. I don't really think they take it very seriously. Um,
Mhm.
and if they do, they're just moving too slowly. We're waiting too long to help these kids. So,
Mhm.
when they say you can't diagnose till third grade, well, that's just completely untrue. It's unsupported by anything. But if you think about it, you've got kids in third grade who have now been struggling for 4 years. And if you don't think that 9-year-old knows that he's struggling, you're wrong because that 9-year-old knows that he's struggling. And so we
Yeah.
waited for 4 years. And then on top of that, the brain has changed in those 4 years. So now it's going to be harder to learn. There's social emotional impacts. So I mean, I think there's some egos involved. I think that some people have developed programs that they thought were great, and then as the years go by, we learn through research that they're not so great, but they don't want to admit it because we have
Mhm.
our egos involved. And I've written things that I put out there that I wish I could take back, but
Mhm.
it's 'cause I learn along the way, and I think it's okay to admit when you were wrong. But so to fix it,
Well, it's time to put our egos aside and do what's best for our kids and our adults, right?
yes. Yeah, I mean, that's hard to do if you have a big ego, but,
Mhm.
yeah, I just egos and money, I think is a big problem in moving forward with this, and then there's just a lot of different information, so you can pick and choose what research you wanna decide to look at, you know?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of that as well.
And I know, speaking with some of the dyslexia specialists here in our school system in our Midland, Odessa area, I know many of them say it's like they have really good hearts and they want to help every kid, but they're like, I'm assigned 10 schools and each school has, like 30 students that I have to, and I can't give them the attention that I want to give them because, the school systems either can't hire enough dyslexia specialists or don't have the funds to hire
That's
dyslexia
true.
specialists.
That's true, and I do feel for them. I know they're trying. It's
Mhm,
more of a systematic issue than a personal teacher issue.
exactly. um, and so going back to if we only have volunteer instructors to help our students or adults specifically that have dyslexia or any other kind of learning differences or disabilities, what kind of professional development um, do you recommend for not only adult literacy organizations, but even teachers that are in the K through 12 system?
Okay, so I'm biased, but they all need to go and learn structured literacy. So they need to
Okay.
understand what to do, what questions to ask a student when they come to a word they don't know or word they can't spell. But it's not really about the program that they have in front of them. It's not the book they have, the scope and sequence. It's about the teacher's education. So the teachers need to be educated about how English is structured so that they know how to respond to a student who's struggling with something. They need to understand how to do an assessment and look at the miscues and look at the qualitative data and understand what the qualitative data is telling them about why the student, if a student guessed on a word, then looking at the word they guessed with and understanding why they made that mistake, and then understanding how to go about it. So any kind of structured literacy program, we offer the dyslexia certificate program. There's also structured word inquiry, which is amazing for adults, like really good for adults.
Okay.
There's lots of places that offer them online. It's not easy. So these trainings aren't supposed to be quick. They're not supposed to be easy. These are things that when you graduate, you become a specialist. So, when you go to these trainings, expect to take courses and then do a practicum. And that's how you become an expert. So you need to not just do like these one-day trainings and check it off and say, oh, we did a one-day training. That'll get you started, but that's not going to it's not going to make you the expert that you need to be.
Continued.
Yeah, you need to be an expert teacher at this because they're very difficult students. They're not difficult people, but I mean, they're having a really hard time remembering all of the stuff. And if they have an expert teacher, it's going to help them. So just become an expert in the area is what I would say. And there's lots of resources now to do that.
Right. And so, we'll share all those resources that you mentioned in our comments after the live stream too, as well. And so and you touched on this a little bit through our conversation, but best ways for not just teachers, but just the community in general to interact with struggling readers. I know like patience plays a big part in that, but it's like they get stereotyped. They're like, oh, I don't like to use the word dumb, but you're dumb or you're slow or you're annoying or people get impatient with them, and it's like they don't understand what this person is struggling with. So how would you recommend interacting with struggling readers?
So I have two answers. Excuse me, sorry. The first one is a little unrealistic, but we have something called Dyslexia for a Day, which is a simulation. So if you can find your way to a simulation so you can go through what it might feel like to be somebody who's struggling, that would be a good way to gain empathy. And then the other way is just to realize if somebody is struggling reading something or spelling something, to think to yourself, not the first thought should not be that they're dumb, they're stupid, they're unmotivated, all these things. But the first thought should be, wow, that must be really hard. I'm sure that person doesn't want to be struggling with reading and writing. Because I always try to tell teachers and administrators, this student is not trying to struggle with reading and spelling. Nobody wants to have dyslexia. So just give people a little bit of time. It's not an intellectual issue. The fact that they're even trying is amazing. But it's just, I mean, that's going to fall on deaf ears for a lot of people. I hear almost every single day I hear a joke about dyslexia or reading just on TV. Just someone just like randomly says something and they don't really mean any harm by it. But I catch those things. I'm sure we all do. And I just think, maybe thinking a little bit more about what you're actually saying, that somebody isn't struggling with reading and spelling, like I said, because they want to.
Right. And I think too, and I speak about this all the time, but I think there's a misconception because the United States is a first world country that they're like, oh, we don't have those kind of issues. We don't have literacy issues. We don't have, learning disability issues. We're a first world country with top-notch education. I laugh at that part because we're behind compared to other countries and as far as education is concerned. But so people don't think they're like, oh, they're not a struggling reader. They're just unmotivated and lazy because we don't have those kind of issues in the United States. And so I'm here to tell you, as an adult executive director of Adult Literacy Center, we see it every day.
Every day, all day long. Yes.
Exactly. And so a little bit back to the professional development, and you talked about teachers learning, or educators learning structured reading and being taught how to teach reading in a better way. I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and there was a presenter that was talking about how educators need to be taught differently in the higher education system. And many of teachers and educators or universities in Texas in particular, I'm talking just about Texas, they had failing grades, D's and F's, in how they were teaching educators graduating. And so if they're not being taught properly, then they're going to go off and teach improperly to our kids. So what do you think some changes need to be made in the higher education system as far as how we're teaching our future educators and future teachers and instructors on how to teach our kids?
Well, they definitely need more than one night of instruction on what dyslexia is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know that they're getting very few hours on what dyslexia is. So I think
Mm-hmm.
more information on about what that is and what other learning disabilities are, even dysgraphia, dyscalculia, executive functioning. They need to
Mm-hmm.
understand what it is and why the student is struggling so that they gain that empathy and that understanding of the student. And then they just really need to build in the structured literacy. They need to talk about how the language is structured and how to teach a student who's struggling with it, instead of teaching them to guess, teaching them to use cueing systems, teaching them to use context. That's all great for comprehension, but if somebody
Mm-hmm.
can't read the word on the page, they're not going to get, sometimes they get the comprehension. It's amazing. But if they're really struggling with the word on the page, we're not really at the point where we can teach them to guess or use pictures. If we teach students or teachers to use pictures, what's going to happen when they're, they start reading books that don't have pictures? So
Mm-hmm.
just really focusing on the language itself and teaching it from a very, I have a degree in linguistics, so I would say they should all have a course in linguistics for educators, so they
Mm-hmm.
understand all of this stuff. But this is all like, utopia kind of stuff.
Yeah, but if we don't start speaking about it, maybe we can put a spark in
Yes.
spark in there, and things starts changing. And speaking about language, in effect, we serve a lot of English language learners too. They're learning the English language, and people think that dyslexia is only affects people that speak English, but it affects everyone. It can affect, if your first language is Spanish, you could have dyslexia. If your first language is Italian, you could have dyslexia, So dyslexia affects everyone, or can affect, everyone, whatever language that you speak. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, so I always say dyslexia affects humans, not languages. So it's a human thing. It just presents differently. So if you have dyslexia and you're a Spanish speaker or Spanish reader, it's going to just, because Spanish is more predictable. I'm not going to say
Mhm.
it's a very predictable language. It's much more predictable than English. So their symptoms tend to be more fluency than like spelling and things like that, because English is a little more complicated spelling wise. And
Okay.
but in other languages, it all it just presents differently, but it's there. It's a human thing, not a language
Okay. Well,
thing.
that's good to know that it presents differently depending on what their first language is.
Absolutely, yes.
That's a new thing that I learned today,
Oh, good.
among many other things.
Oh, good.
Um, and so, back to speaking about adults with dyslexia, there are so little resources available for adults with dyslexia. Can you name a couple that adults can, if they, they know they have dyslexia and they're struggling, but they want to get better? What are some resources that are available out there for them?
So actually, in Texas, you guys have NIHouse,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yes.
has an adult literacy program. And
Yes.
they do know their dyslexia stuff, so they could go there. But as far as adults with dyslexia and adult literacy, I can't name anything. there's lots of adult literacy, like pro literacy and COABE and your local
Mm-hmm.
libraries, what you guys do. But when it comes to adults with dyslexia, there really isn't anything that I am aware of
Mm-hmm.
specifically for adults with dyslexia, which is why I wrote the book. But
Can you create something, Kelly?
I always
And we'll purchase it from you and use it.
there should be an adult dyslexia network, and I believe there's one in the UK, but I don't think I should do it because I don't have dyslexia. But I do think there's an adult out there with dyslexia that should be the one who does that for sure. And I
That
think
would be
they could
amazing.
have like Zoom meetings, they could have annual meeting or they could have monthly Zoom meetings because they feel so isolated. So many of them
Uh-huh.
are so isolated. And if they had other people to talk to about it, I think it would be really helpful for them and they could share resources and they could create this amazing place. But like I said, I don't know if I would be the person to do that.
Uh-huh. Newhouse, unfortunately, they're in the Houston
Yeah,
area.
I know. I
And
was gonna
so, Texas is so big that, a lot of our students, um, I don't know if they offer too many virtual opportunities, but it's difficult for us to send our students there.
yes, no, I know. I
In
wasn't
Houston.
sure
But
geographically where you
they're
guys
an amazing organization. We chat with them, very often to get help. Um, so how if let's see, can you speak about just a little bit about early intervention, accommodations, early testing, and all those kind of things that are available for anybody that has been diagnosed with dyslexia?
so the intervention for people who was it goes back to the structured literacy.
Hmm.
That's been identified needs to have the structured literacy and the expert teacher. But everyone needs to be screened. Everyone should be screened in like kindergarten, first, second grade. I know Texas just passed, I think they updated their law recently. So I think you guys are doing screening. Um, but yeah, I mean, it just goes back to everyone learning.
So everyone, regardless of whether you potentially have dyslexia or not, should be screened.
Oh yeah, I think everyone should be
Okay.
screened in kindergarten, first grade. You can get false positives, but what I always say about that is if you are a student who gets a false positive and you get that structured literacy, there's no harm there. You're just going to learn quicker than the student who doesn't,
Hmm.
and then you'll work your way
Okay.
out. But it's still a great. I mean, every student should have structured literacy. So it's
Okay.
not. It's just that the person with dyslexia probably needs a little bit more intensive structured literacy. Definitely need to be screened early because the social emotional impact of not being screened and not being identified and just being that kid that just sits in class year after year after year and struggles is huge. It's really impactful on their life and traumatizing. And I think
And
it
then they'll
is,
just get further and further behind too.
and they
Yeah.
know it. And it's just wrong on so many levels
Mhm.
because we know what to do. And,
Yeah.
I think the people I worry about the most are the ones that end up in adult literacy because they tend to be the ones that didn't have the advocates and the parents and not because
Mhm.
the parents and advocates weren't there or it's nothing negative about them. They just didn't know how to advocate. Sometimes it's a cultural thing where the parents don't want to go into the school and they don't feel like they
Mhm.
should go into the school and argue. Um, or they just can't. Maybe they have 6 jobs. I don't know what it is, but I'm worried about the kids who don't have the advocates. I tend to get the
Yeah.
emails from the parents who have all the resources in the world, but the ones who don't have the resources are the ones who end up in the adult literacy program.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And we try our best to help them, but
Oh
once they
yeah,
become, like I said, an adult, it becomes even more challenging.
it does. And I
Uh-huh.
always remember when I was in adult literacy, we would never get the 18 to 30-year-olds. We always
Yeah.
got like 35 to 70. And like
Uh-huh.
they come
Yes.
back, and it seems like they come back when they have their own kids. So then they
Mhm.
come back. But that 20 to 30, those young kids never came to the adult literacy program. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was more, I think some of it may have to do with they may feel embarrassed or
Absolutely.
shamed.
Or
Yeah,
they're just
to seek help.
trying to survive, they just don't have time.
Mhm. Exactly. And so, for the adults that they know they've been diagnosed with dyslexia, can they receive accommodations if they're going to, like, when they're in college and things like that?
Yeah.
How do they find those accommodations and assistive technology and things like that.
Yes. So if you have an official diagnosis, you can go to your college's student disability center. They're named different
Mhm.
things, different colleges, and you give them the testing, and they will give you accommodations. Um, the problem is now educating the professors about why you need the accommodations. Some professors don't understand if they can't see your disability why you need it, but
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
legally, yes, you can get the accommodations. It's in college, in adults, it's under ADA instead of IDEA. But
Okay.
your student center should be able to walk you through all of that. But
Okay.
I do believe that some student disability centers will also do learning disability testing, so you need
Mhm.
to ask them as well.
And so I know, and it's some we've been asked also, can they get accommodations at work if they've been officially
Yeah,
diagnosed?
it's a disability, so that's also under ADA. So that's an interesting point too, because I've really been trying to figure out how do I get to the corporations and the corporate world where I can
Mhm.
start training human resources so they understand what it's like to be a person with dyslexia and how to help them, and then how to not discriminate against them. So I mean
Mhm.
that's a whole other world that needs dyslexia awareness as well. Is that all that human resources world?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Needs to be incorporated into the HR,
Yes,
probably professional
yes,
development.
for sure. Yes.
um, so is there any new research that you know about available to help individuals with dyslexia? I
There's
know that there's research constantly going on.
constant. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't
Mhm.
point anything out in particular. I would, there are a few books. I can send you a list of books that I would recommend.
Mhm.
But if you go to the International Dyslexia Association's website, they usually have a list of research, or go to your local Decoding Dyslexia website, or
Okay.
the Reading League. If you go to those three organizations, they usually list current research.
Okay. Perfect. And any last thoughts that you would like to add, resources or any other comments?
No, thank you for having me. I just really excited. I love talking about adult literacy. It's like I said,
Mhm.
it's why I do what I do. I think adults are just they're a wealth of information about this topic, and I think we just need to spend more time asking them about their dyslexia, asking them about their experience, and really letting them talk about it. Because when I talked to them, they always told me that no one ever talks to them about it, and they feel
Mm.
really isolated. So I would love, just more conversations about it with them.
Build that trust with
Yes,
them too before you start, helping them and say, okay, I know, I understand your struggles. Let's um, let's work through them together.
yes, yes,
A
yes,
partnership.
yes, yes.
And so, and your book, is it available anywhere and everywhere? I think
It's on
every
Amazon. Yeah,
educator should have a copy of that.
it's on Amazon.
Perfect.
Yes.
So, highly recommend they get a copy of Kelli's book, The Adult Side of Dyslexia, and check out her Dyslexia Training Institute for any further information or training opportunities. Thank you again, Kelli, for joining us and informing our followers and our uh, uh, supporters about dyslexia, because I think it's such an important topic. So, and this month is also
Just
Dyslexia Awareness Month.
yes,
So, perfect time to get out there and advocate for yourself and advocate for more dyslexia uh, information and being educated on it.
I agree.
So, thank you everyone for watching. This was our last live stream of the year. So, Kelli, what a great way to end our live streams for the year. And we hope to see everyone next year. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.